Hello and welcome to Module 2 of the IATA Dangerous Goods Training. Module 2 is about classification and the dangerous goods list. We've already gone over classification in the 49 CFR and IMDG training, so we won't spend much time on that. We'll just briefly go through it. But we will be concentrating on the dangerous goods list. In this module, we will be referring to the dangerous goods list, which is Exhibit 4A, B, and C of your exhibits that I sent you. We'll also be looking at Exhibit 5A and 6A. 5A especially, 6A just real quickly. But for this one, I am going to have the dangerous goods list up there because if you see by the presentation, it's really just going over this whole list, column by column. And this one really delves into some of the packing, whether something can have an exemption or a limited quantity, and where you go in the book to figure out what you need to do. So this is hopefully going to be a very good module with a lot of little educational points that you're going to need in the day-to-day operations. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and put the dangerous goods list up here, since that's what we're going to be looking at. And as you can see, I've got the list here. What I've done is I have put it in alphabetical order, just like the book is. And these are, again, the commodities that I was advised that Mercedes is currently shipping. So let's just start going through it. And like I said, we've beaten up the first 5 columns, so I'll go over those fairly quickly and just kind of point out how IATA is a little bit different. And we'll start with column number A. But if you'll notice at the top, these columns, we refer to columns before with numbers as columns 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. For 49 CFR hazmat table and the dangerous goods list in IMDG, here in IATA, they have letters. So it's columns A, B, C, D, etc. So not a big difference, I know, but just something to point out. So we'll start with column A, and that's our UN/ID number, your United Nations number. Of course, I think you all know by now it's a 4-digit number. You always have to put the letters UN in front of it. So that's, like I said, pretty obvious. We've gone over that. The proper shipping name description. Here in IATA, you'll see some things that could be a little bit different. Our first example on there of the articles, pressurized hydraulic, is its own line item. And then you see the exact same UN number, articles, pressurized pneumatic. So in 49 CFR and IMDG, these were the same line item. They were the same way, but because they go into a little bit difference on the, I'm trying to see where else there is a difference. There actually is no different. If you look at the 2 columns, they have the same class, label, accepted quantity, packing instructions, for same limited quantity instructions, same special provisions. So they are pretty much exactly alike. So it's just that for air, they are considered separate proper shipping names. They list a lot of their ors twice instead of just listing them once. So you don't see the or C that much in the IATA dangerous goods list. So shouldn't throw you off. You pick which ones that is yours. So we've got, that's the one difference you see. If you look down and you see batteries wet filled with acid, the third one down, it's got a little cross sign or plus sign there, which basically means that there is an additional description. So it'll help better define possibly what is which battery we're talking about, or how does it qualify to be that type of a battery. So that should help you out a little bit to make sure you're in the right area. And this is contained in Appendix A. And with IATA, it has all of their appendices in the back, towards the back of the book. And when you go there in the book, it starts with your glossaries, and then it is your abbreviation, and then it has your hazardous substances, who your competent authorities are. But then when it gets down to the further description, and I'm trying to find that of exactly where that is in the book. I should have had this marked for us. But instead of wasting a lot of time, I know I'm going to come across it when I'm leafing through some other things. Up and read what the one was for battery to give you an example of a little bit more of a description. It's actually in the, I'm going to find it. It's actually in the definitions, or what they call definitions, or glossary. So if you just look up alphabetically, batteries wet filled with acid, you come down and you get a better description of exactly what they're talking about as far as what needs to be a battery that falls into this category. So if you do see a star, none of y'all have a star, which basically means that it needs a technical name. So I'm going to scoot down, trying to see if they're just looking through. There are none that have a star. Basically, if you saw a star, it would, that's their way. Remember in 49 CFR, there was a G for generic in column 1. In the IMDG, there is the special provision number 274 tells you it needs additional description. Here it is a star. So that's one of the strange little things that each regulations do it differently. So those are the things you look for. Like I said, with yours commodities here, we don't have any that require a technical name or any additional information to go with the proper shipping name. So just a note, they are in alphabetical order. And you will be asked about that, of the differences between the books of which orders. And just some little things, like if they happen to begin with a numeral or single letters, you see some chemical names, you don't really have any of those in yours, or prefix of alpha, beta, meta. Again, you don't have any of those, but if you do see those are not part of the alphabetical listing of the proper shipping name, but they are actually part of the shipping names. And you'll see the terms NOS in there. So, and like I said, with NOS, you look for whether or not it has a star next to it. So moving on to column number 3 is the class or division or subhazards. Again, your goods is the way they are. They all have a single class. There are no subdivisions in there, which you might think, well, something like a paint could be a paint and a corrosive. Well, that has a whole separate UN number, but the UN number 1263 is just the flammable liquid. So, okay. So, but I think as far as your classes and subdivisions, on column C, kind of slip over a little bit over there, we've gone over these before. I think you know those. The ones that cover goods that are yours are class 2.2, as we see of like the articles pressurized hydraulic on the first item. They're non-flammable gases. So they have that green label of non-flammable gases. As you can remember, I'm not sharing my screen, so I just grabbed a little thing. You don't need to know that, but you have a non-flammable gas label on those. It's the green ones that I'm sure you've seen around the plant. Flammable liquids, those will be a little bit more rare when you look down at your commodities as far as what you have that is a flammable liquid. You do have your engine's internal combustion, which if it falls under 3528, which is considered a flammable liquid. And that gets into some details when you're looking at the whether or not it has a, it's new, or if it's had fuel run through it for testing, things like that. We'll get in whether or not it qualifies for that. You've got gasoline, that was on your list, or some other, there's a typo I see on the word gasoline. You've got others that, gasoline we've gone over before, very common that people use. And then you've got some paint that that is, again, a flammable liquid under 3. Those fall under different packing groups as you have it. But those are your class 3s, which are, of course, you may see the red labels of the flammable liquid throughout your facility. Then you have corrosive materials. And when you think of corrosive materials for what you're doing, we fall into that battery category. And the battery categories of the wet and non-spillable or potentially spillable batteries that fall under corrosive. That, that battery acid that's in the battery is something that could, burn through skin, things like that. So you want to be careful with those. And then we've got your 9, which you'll probably see a lot of those more so in your facility. You've got dangerous goods and apparatus. You've got all your lithium-ion batteries fall into miscellaneous number 9. And then you have your safety devices are a 9 miscellaneous. And again, we'll go into a little bit more on the specific types of commodities on the automotive product module. Then we have our hazard labels. This is the labels that go on your goods. So again, miscellaneous, yours are pretty simple. Your lithium-ion batteries, they have their own labels. So those are very specific to those. And then all the rest, as you see, are down there as it is on your table. So your packing group, we talked about this before. Packing group, just a note, you see how many of your commodities don't have an actual packing group, which is kind of interesting because in a way that's kind of rare. So you've got your articles pressurized like your struts, they don't have a packing group. Batteries don't have a packing group. Goods and apparatus don't. Gasoline does. Gasoline has a packing group, and that's based because it's a class 3 on the flammability of the product and what its flash point is. And then you've got your lithium-ion batteries that don't fall into a packing group because they, all have more specific packaging type. But then your paints do. And your paints, again, of what that flammable point is, what temperature that flash point does it become flammable. My guess is most of yours fall into a class 2, a packing group 2 or packing group 3, but you have to kind of keep an eye on that. And as you know, the packing group, very important to remember, packing group 1 indicates it's the greatest level of danger. Packing group 2 is a moderate danger. Packing group 3 is a minor danger or level of danger out there. So that's important because that's what you use to select your packaging. So, we talked about that before. Those UN specification marks, you want to make sure that if you've got something with a packing group 2, you're using the material, the fiberboard boxes, especially that outer packaging that has a Y in there. That means it's been built to uphold the standards of anything that's in a packing group 3. So now we're going to move on to the columns that are different than you've seen or give a little bit more detail and direction that we've seen in the 49 CFR or the IMDG. So both of those sort of, the IMDG and 49 CFR, when you start talking about packaging, yeah, they give you some instructions and where to go, but it's like a whole section and you kind of, it's a little bit more general, but you kind of got to read the whole thing to make sure that your commodity or UN number isn't mentioned anywhere. What I really like and people like about the IATA is it really sends you to that specific place that covers your commodity. So to me, there's a little bit more comfort level that if I have to read a third of a page or a half a page or a whole page, or maybe sometimes it's 2 whole pages on a packing instruction, but it's all right there. And instead of hopping from, here's where my section is on what my compatibility is and how I have to close it is in another, and what types of packagings I can use is in another section. They put it all together and consolidated it on one section. So it does make it a little bit better. And as you know, most of these packaging requirements, they may be a little bit more stringent for air than they are for ground and for ocean. But I see a lot of companies do their packaging based on air shipments so that if anything does have to go out by air, they have the packaging, and it might not be that big of a difference. So it's a great starting point to say, okay, here's our packaging for this UN number. Now, because of the big difference between air and ocean for this, and it could be in the batteries or whatever, maybe there is a less expensive option for ocean and domestic that you may want to consider and make air the exception. So, but of course, that's up to your packaging guys. So we'll start off with column column F. Sorry, I was looking at the spreadsheet. Column F is your, and all of this is for passenger and cargo aircraft. So that means it's basically all of it will go into cargo aircraft a little later. So you can ship this by air under these situations, either on a passenger or a cargo aircraft. If you don't qualify and you're forbidden to move it on a passenger aircraft, then you move over to the cargo aircraft section. So let's just see, since most of our stuff is usually okay to go, most commodities are okay, but you've got a lot that might not be able to because you've got some of the lithium ion batteries. So, EQ, it says up top, this is where I like where it points you in the direction, EQ C section 6. And when you look at 2.6, it's just a little table of accepted quantities. And since just about everything you have that you normally ship falls under E0, I really didn't have a copy of this, but it's not permitted as an accepted quantity. So no matter how small it is or little of it that you have, you can't just ship it as non-hazardous. It's got to be hazardous. So let's just go down the list real quickly, and I see EOs, EOs, EOs. Oh, there's an E2, but we're talking about gasoline, and I think this is a little bit more rare of a commodity that y'all would be shipping. Could be that you're receiving it in, not really shipping it out, but it's E2, and for E2, you can have as little, if it's under 30 grams. So we know 28 grams is an ounce. I'm an American guy, so I picture things in ounces. So you've got to have less than an ounce of gasoline. That's a pretty small amount of gasoline in order to ship it as an accepted quantity. And I doubt you're doing that. If you are, maybe you'll find some exceptions here. So I start scrolling through some others. EO, of course, the lithium ion batteries are going to be not exempt at any time. Then you get down to paint. And again, this is the category, I don't know a lot of what you're doing with the paint. I don't think you're really shipping it out. You probably are more bringing it in. But even at a packing group 1, if you go to E3 and E2 this is up to, for your inner packaging, you can go up to 30 grams on both of those too. So if you're doing paint in less than 1 ounce, yeah, that may be possible if y'all are working with like the touch-up paints, things like that. But I don't know if you're distributing directly. Those could be. But you know, if those are under an ounce, then they would be able to be shipped for as an accepted quantity, meaning that you wouldn't have to ship it as hazardous. So that is a possibility. E3, E2, and E1 all have that inner packaging of 1 ounce. They have a little bit different on the outer packaging, whether it's 300 grams or 500 grams. And again, that would be the outer casing. So you could ship a case of these things, but as long as they don't, you know, go over, you know, 3 pounds or something like that, it still has to be a pretty small quantity for you to be exempt from shipping it as hazardous. So something to look into. But most of your commodities are in EO, which means, okay, they're not permitted. So let's kind of almost take that off the table for a lot of the goods that you are doing. And let's scroll back up. So we've got that out of the way. So now we're going to ship this stuff, and we know that it's dangerous goods. So how do we ship it as dangerous goods to go out via air? And again, we're thinking the normal air freight route is passenger aircraft. That's where a lot of things move. The ones that are cargo only, I mean, those could be possible. Some of the couriers do cargo only for their international, like you see the FedEx planes out there, but you've got the big flights for Lufthansa, things like that, that go as cargo only a couple of times a week to certain destinations. But right now we're looking at what's comfortable, that if I do this for air freight, I don't have to worry about what kind of aircraft is going on. Now, of course, your forwarder who's booking this, they have certain guidelines. They know your commodities and whether it's going to be passenger or cargo aircraft. But if, you know, when we go into cargo aircraft, that brings on a whole nother label. We have to mark these things as cargo aircraft only. So let's look at passenger right now. And as you see, passenger, you've got the EQ, we've already done column F. So the next thing is columns G and H. And you see that limited quantity. And one, it's going to give you, if you can ship a limited quantity, it's going to tell you what packing instruction you have to use. And then it's going to say, what is your max net quantity per package? And that's that inner package. So how are you packaging this? If you're not packaging in small enough quantities, you don't even need to look at this, and it won't be limited quantity. So let's look down at your commodities, and we start off, we see forbidden, 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 forbidden. Again, we hit gasoline. Okay, gasoline, if we are shipping less than a liter, which is a quart, so that's not even a gallon. I mean, that's a fourth of a gallon. So if we're shipping a liter of gasoline by air freight, which I don't know why you would ever do that, since gasoline is available everywhere in the world, so I really doubt that this is going to apply to anything you're doing. Going back down, lithium-ion batteries, you should know by now, just hearing that over and over, lithium-ion batteries is never going to be, it's got to be fully classified as hazardous, however it's shipped. So we've got some forbiddens, 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 forbiddens on the lithium-ion batteries, and then we get down to paint again. So if we've got a class 1 paint, a packing group 1 paint, it's forbidden to be shipped as a limited quantity. Then you get into the packing group 2, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting of that inner packaging of what you can ship on here. A liter, you know, that's a small container. I always think of like a liter is, you know, that's why varnishes are, they're more flammable than just regular paint that you would paint your house with. That could be an oil-based paint. So you're looking at 1 liter here, and then you're looking at, which I think this is kind of interesting, 10 liters here for a packing group 3. It used to be 5 liters. So you can ship up to a gallon of that. 2 gallons of that now, a little over 2 gallons of that now as a limited quantity. So I guess if you picture, you're not going to have a large incident if 2 gallons of paint spills on an airplane, or 1 liter or quart of a varnish that's, is on an airplane. And then you've got your safety devices that are forbidden. So that's our limited quantity. So limited quantity basically for your commodities is off the table. So you shouldn't be dealing really with limited quantity, but you may be receiving some limited quantities in, like gasoline or your paints. So that's just a question you'd have to ask. So next we're looking at what packing instructions. So how do we package these things? And here's where it's nice and clean. So if we're looking at column I on the packing instructions, this gives you a lot of detail of what to do. And let's just first look at the list, because you do have different ones for different commodities. Packing instruction 208 is for articles pressurized hydraulic. So in that section, the yellow pages, which is section 4.1.4, in your book, you would go to what number it is, and they are in numeric order. And it's like I said before, it's not always perfect or whatever, but usually you're in the right area. If I've got a class 2, I'm in a packing instruction that begins with a 2. Okay, good. So you got your 208 and 208. You've got your batteries here, which are an 870, begins with an 8. Go down to other battery, the 872. Dangerous goods and apparatus. It's telling you to C962. So just kind of interesting because it's written that way. I'd be like, okay, these are a little bit different instructions. So just to show you, I don't have it there. This instruction, it says this instruction applies to UN 3363. So this is a packing instruction just for these goods. And it just tells you about what it is and what is required, but it just tells you where to go on your compatibility, and then it goes into the detail of what if your apparatus contains more than one dangerous goods. What are you supposed to do with that? How do you have to have that marked? So for gases, cylinders, and all, it must comply to the requirements of a certain packing group. So, just because you're in a class 9 and you've got some non-flammable gas in there, you need to go back to whatever that packing group, and this one they referred to 200, which is the general one. So basically it's going to say that, it's got to be in some kind of packaging in there, or still when it's installed in the apparatus, it can't be leaking or set off while it's in transit, things like that. So, and then it kind of talks about any kind of combined packages and outer packages that are required. So doesn't mean that's going to be complicated here. And because of that's why they don't show you only one, because if you've got multiple, it could be anything. And then anything could be in an apparatus or machinery. And like just like the articles that were pressurized or hydraulic, this again splits it into an apparatus and in machinery, even though they're the same exactly for each one, everything about it. They're just showing it as different line items. So don't worry about that. Just pick the one that you're using. So going down here, we see that engine internal combustion is a class 3, and of course its packing instructions is 378. Gasoline is 353. Lithium-ion batteries. Here's the one we're very specific. So here's where you get down, and we've got something that's the first time we've seen is the old lithium-ion batteries, the nice plain one that I think y'all are going to be using. It's basically saying right here, it's forbidden on passenger aircraft. So you don't even have that option of shipping these on passenger aircraft. And, just throwing in, I also know that from past experience that we've had in the Daimler has guidelines that are international that I'm sure your battery people are well aware of of what their process is for lithium-ion batteries and whether it's allowed by air freight at all. I think the guideline I know is it's really, they don't want it being shipped by air at all unless under certain circumstances, and then they allow it. So that's important to kind of look that up. But you kind of see that right here. It is on a passenger aircraft. So, and then we haven't gotten to that C965, but that's where we're eventually going to be going for that. Then we've got 969. Then we have another lithium-ion batteries. This one was including lithium-ion polymer batteries. Here, including lithium alloy batteries. Totally different UN number here, but again, these are forbidden also on passenger aircraft. Then we go down to lithium metal batteries pack, another different one. It's got the packing instruction 970. Paint, we've got 351. Oops, sorry. 353 and 355, because we have different packing groups here. And then safety devices are under 961. So let's stop there, and we've got exhibit number 5A, which are the packing instructions that you find in section 4.1.4. And you just look up to 961 and you go to that page. It's your exhibit 5A. So let's get there. So we start off by, okay, they'll tell you, okay, do these packing instructions comply everywhere in the world? And so we first look at, and I said, you're not looking at this that much. Mainly it is the forwarder who's going to be looking at these. So you've got state variations in Belgium and in the US here. So just so you know, a lot of these end up not really applying, but your state variations are in section 2, which is marked limitations, and they're called variations. So by state, looking it up, if I went to USG, that's the US government, and went to USG 16, interesting, it specifically talks about safety devices here. So, of course, this is something that your forwarder is going to read, and it's good for you to have information on it. So, reading USG 16, safety devices, including airbags, inflator, airbag modules, and seatbelt pretensioners, may not be transported to, from, within the United States without prior approval by the appropriate national authorities in the U.S. Such approvals remain valid for subsequent transport provided there is no change in its composition, design, or packaging. The dangerous goods transport document, or the shipper's declaration or dangerous goods declaration, must contain the approved safety and the EX number or product code for each approved safety device in association with the basic description required. If product codes are used, they must be traceable to the specific EX number. So if your supplier for these safety devices has an exemption for this, you must use that exemption to move forward, put those on your shipping papers for air freight. So these requirements do not apply to outer packages. Is not required to be marked on the outer packages. These requirements do not apply to safety devices provided that provisions of 49 CFR 173.166 have been met. So I wonder what 173.166 actually says. And like I said, some of these things I look up as I'm going, and it does, take you on a chase. So I look under 173.166, assignment of hazard zones. So it just basically tells you your further classification on a class 2 non-flammable gas. So that's where you're going to find out how, information from the manufacturer about how these are actually shipped, if there's any exemptions with them, if you can use, exceptions, the EX number of whether or not you're allowed to ship these, without showing that or not. So the Belgium 03, just real quickly, BE 03, going to that. Belgium has a lot. They're like the United States. They have a lot. The following substances are defined as explosive substances and are subject to the variation B02. And then going down, it gives a list of UN numbers. And so I get down to, we're dealing with UN number 3268. And 3268 is listed there. So basically what it's saying is you have to comply to number 2. And again, it is telling you that you have to get prior authorization for shipping it to Belgium. So that's something you need to look at, is whether or not these goods are allowed to go into Belgium. And you have to be careful here, because if there is, and this is something your forwarder should be looking at, just because you're shipping these, say, back to Germany, doesn't mean the flight that they're going to put it on isn't going to go through Brussels. And if it does, then you're going to have to comply to the Belgian rules in IATA, which they do have a variation there that you might have to look up. So something as simple as these safety devices, the reason for that is a lot of the airbags used to fall under the 1.4 with the name explosive, and that's what these exemptions are, or exceptions are being looked at, of whether they still comply or not. So you say the word safety devices and ears don't really, prick up or listen real closely, but you're like, yeah, it's a safety device. They're airbags. Well, airbags used to be a pretty big deal because it had the word explosive and fell under explosive. So you still have some of that lingering on in some of these regulations. So, okay, we've got there. Then we've got operator variations, and that's right after the state variations. You've got different airlines that may say, okay, there's certain rules for these particular things. So on there, we've got an AM09, and AM is Aero Mexico. So if you are air freighting any of these goods to Mexico, you're like, okay, let me go find out what AM09 is. And Class 9 commodities pertaining to this class will not be accepted for carriage with the exception of the following products. Then you go down and it shows UN 3268. So that's good news. It says, okay, you are not allowed to ship this on Aero Mexico unless it's one of the commodity, UN numbers that are listed, and 3268 is not listed. So you're like, okay, I don't have to worry about going to Mexico. I can ship it air freight. The next would be MP. And I have to tell you, I am not an airline code person. My air freight people always think, it's very obvious when they pick it up. But MP, I'm not sure what that actual airline is. So I will go to MP, and that's Martin Air Holland. So Martin Air Holland has MP09. And MP09, it says for UN 3268, safety devices carried to, from, or via the U.S. that do not require an EX number, the DG shall include the statement safety devices in accordance with 49 CFR 173.166. So here I am looking at two of the different things that I looked up on operator and state variations, the country and airlines. Both of them referred to 49 CFR 173.166. Great flag for me to say, you know what? we need to stop. I need to go and make sure I understand where we fall under 173.166. So, like I said, this is should be a one-time exercise unless anything changes for you to go through some of these things, but to have that understanding. So overall, it's like, okay, I'm pretty good to go anywhere with safety devices on an aircraft without looking up. Then it says the instructions apply on passenger aircraft and cargo aircraft only. So that makes sense. So it is saying that, you know, it can be used for both of them. You've got 961 and 961 here. Then it says the general packing requirements must be met. Do you remember those way back? That was general packing requirements on the last module were, you know, they have to be in good condition, they have to have proper testing, et cetera, et cetera. That's all the stuff that's real obvious, but I went over with them anyway. Then the packing instruction goes down to additional packing requirements. So first it says packagings must meet packing group 3 performance standards. Okay, what's this telling you is there is no packing group here. So you can't just ship it in anything. It has to at least be a packing group 3, which most like fiberboard boxes are, but it just means that it has to have that UN certification. So again, you're shipping anything hazardous, it should be in one of those boxes is marked with one of those UN with a circle and all the codes afterwards that indicates. And that's packing group 3 is going to be the letter Z. And I'm not sure if y'all have done it, but a lot of companies just have a policy that they only use packing group 2s, which are the ones that are a Y. So packing group 3 has to be met. The packages must be designated and constructed to prevent movement of the articles and inadvertent operation during normal conditions of transport. Okay, I mentioned it before. This is where some of your goods that when you go to load them into that box, you just can't throw a bunch of them in the box and seal it up, because when they move, they're going to shake and hit each other. So you've got to make sure they're in, they have dividers in them within the box that will hold it. Some of them have inlays that you actually fit the material so that it doesn't move at all whatsoever. I think that's what a lot of yours are. So it's just basically saying you can't throw all these in the same box. And then any pressure receptacles must be in accordance with the requirements of the appropriate national authority for substance contained herein. Now, your articles pressurized, those are pressure receptacles inside of there. So we want to make sure that those comply. For cargo aircraft only, it then comes down and say airbag inflators, airbag modules, seatbelt pretensioners, all your stuff. So I got to read this. May also be transported unpackaged on aircraft, cargo aircraft only, and dedicated handling devices when they are transported to, from, or between where they are manufactured and assembly plant, including intermediate handling locations. When transported in dedicated handling devices, the following conditions must be met. So what they're talking about here is if you're shipping these things in racks, and I know y'all use racks for a lot of things. You may not on these, but you can design racks, they're saying, because they know they're going to an assembly plant. So this could be something when you're doing a certain volume, you know, you may not want to do a rack for 12 safety devices, but if you could do a rack that held 144 safety devices and it was much easier to handle, that might be great. So, so then it goes into really where you have to hit the criteria. Provision A115, you know, tells you how you can do that. The handling device must be completely enclosed. So you might have a rack, but it has to be enclosed in that rack or shut off so they can't, I guess, pop out. They must be secured with a dedicated handling device. That's on C. and limits of the column L 4.2, they all meet these requirements with a gross weight not exceeding 1,000 kilos. So a rack can't weigh more than 2,200 pounds, which for these, I don't think you would ever get to that. So just kind of interesting that there is a way to move these things in volume. That may be a way that you can do it, of course, both within the regulation, but on a cost savings if you the devices out in a quantity. And like I said, I don't think you're doing that in the plant because you're receiving the goods in, so you may be receiving them on racks, and you may wonder, God, why do we get them on racks but we ship them out in cartons? So just something to look at, like the CCUSA. I know they have their packaging set up for orders in dozens or 2 dozens, things like that. So it just may be an option when it gets to you're shipping out a certain quantity of more orders and a more consistent basis, you may want larger handling devices. Okay, and then we look at the bottom and it's saying, okay, what kind of combination packages and how big can they be? And how big must the combination packages? So a quantity per package for a passenger aircraft, and like I said, we're talking about air freight here. So all this is kind of out of the normal for y'all for shipping large quantities of these. So it probably doesn't really apply here. So quantities per package. So you can only have up to 25 kilos or a little bit of pounds per package to put on a cargo aircraft, but you can have 100 kilos 4 times that amount on a cargo aircraft only. So you can have a bigger package on there, and that's for the safety devices. So then it says what the outer packagings can be, and they're basically saying they can be drums, they can be jerry cans, they can be boxes. Of course, when you're talking about drums and jerry cans, they have to be in a position where, again, you still have to comply with the other packaging requirements that they don't touch each other and come in contact or move that much. So if that's a possibility to do, they can be done. So most of y'all's are moved in 4G fiberboard boxes. If you look down on the bottom. So yeah, this gives you a little bit more detail of, okay, where are my little exceptions? You found these in 49 CFR and INDG in the special provisions. Here you're finding it more in the packing instructions. So again, this is your base from your packaging team to say, okay, let's look at every possibility. And like I said, it's their job to make sure that the packaging materials are compliant, but they're also responsible for the most economical way of moving it when you're looking at a lot of commodities. And it may be with the plant, a lot of this is most of these goods, because you're an assembly plant and you're a plant, so you are receiving most of these goods. So it's not so important, but when you're returning something or shipping something out or need to do that, you've got a whole different situation there. And it could be that it could be service parts or global service parts, I think they're called now. But it could be that they have to, they're supplying different aftermarket parts, things like that, of what they're looking at. So, and then the other thing, remember, you're also receiving goods. So you want to make sure that you're receiving goods that are in proper condition also. So that's something that you want to make sure, not only that they're going out, but they're coming in the right condition. And that's done at the door when they're unloading the container. Because remember, once it's brought in and basically hits your door, hits your floor and it gets moved within your facility, you then own it. So if there's something wrong with it, it's now your issue, not the suppliers. So, so now let's go back into the top to see where we are. So now we know, let's say, okay, what's the maximum net quantity per package? So how much what is the maximum that we can put on here? So for the articles pressurized like the struts, there are no limits. For the batteries, I don't see a limit. Again, on the dangerous goods and apparatus, it's going back to that 960. It can be tricky, depends on how big the apparatus is and how many they are, how hazardous in it, more than likely it's going to be a fairly, you're not shipping a large amount that's already in an apparatus unless the apparatus itself is filled, really filled with some things. So engines, there are not any limits. Gasoline makes sense. 60 liters is the most that you can put on there. Again, these go in sorry, I should be looking over here. No limit. The batteries, the maximum net on a passenger aircraft is 30 kilos. So you don't want more than 66 pounds on a individual package. So if you've got batteries that weigh over 66 pounds, then you probably can't ship it. There's no way to ship it on a passenger aircraft. Non-spillable batteries, they don't have a limit. Engines don't have a limit. Gasoline, 5 liters. Now here on the lithium-ion batteries, you've got 5 kilos. So you're talking about 11 pounds. So you're talking about, you're talking about the size of not a really big size. So they can't be the bigger lithium-ion batteries. You can get up to 35 kilos on a cargo aircraft. So, and then of course you've got forbidden. It's forbidden. It looks like the lithium. They're either forbidden or they can be 5 kilos. Then of course you've got the paint that goes into their volume because it's a liquid, is in the number of liters. And then the safety devices, your inner package can be 25 kilos, which I don't think you're going to hit that you don't have a 50-pound airbag. Now, if it doesn't qualify for any of those and you can't go in, then you have to go over to your cargo aircraft and you'll see the packing instructions. Most of the time, you'll see that they're the same package and instruction as whether it's there. The gasoline is a different one, but your lithium-ion batteries, when there is one, they are the same. But lithium-ion batteries is one of the few that it does get a little bit tricky, and they are very different for each type of lithium-ion battery. But you kind of see that pattern there. Here it's 4 times more, 25 kilos 100 kilos on, those are your maximum net quantity per package, and that's your inner package. So I don't think you're going to be dealing with those. Then we've got some special provisions, and we go down on some special provisions that we have in here, and those special provisions are listed after your table that you would go into and start looking up what, if I have a special provision that could get me out of shipping these, and we will look some of these up again for the struts, the articles pressurized hydraulic. So it takes you to A48. So here's a great special provision for the struts. A48, packaging tests are not considered necessary. Yay, okay, I don't have to do a test on these, or what, once I have them, I don't have to do anything else for them. I can just use the proper class 3 in this situation, packing group material, packing group 3 material. A114 is articles containing gas intended to function as shock absorbers, including energy absorbing devices or pneumatic springs, are not subject to these regulations provided. Then it goes into certain things about what their capacity is and a minimum burst. Here's where you need to look in to the details from your supplier of whether or not these comply. I know there was some question over in CCUSA that they were receiving some of these articles in, and they had it in the system that they were a UN 3164, and then they started receiving some of these device articles in, and it wasn't marked as hazardous. So it was like, wait a minute, is this marked wrong? Is it not? Whether they were to adjust the quantities or how they were packaged, but they were able to comply with something in A114. So that determines whether or not it was considered hazardous, and you have to go by the regulations. So remember, these are regulations for air freight only. You might have certain special provisions in 49 CFR and IMDG, but so like I said, a lot of these special provisions are good. when you go see, it's not extra work, it's usually less work that you have to do. So again, that is something that needs to be studied and determined on what the materials that you are using, because as you can imagine, there are big differences between, you know, a strut or a shock absorber or, you know, that's being used in a huge bulldozer construction equipment type versus what's used in an automobile can be totally different in size and what, you know, how much of the material they contain. So it does break it down in here. So then you've got A195, and going to A195, it is another section. It applies to articles containing small pressure receptacles with a release device. And then such articles must comply, and then it goes into detail again. So if you've got something in that does qualify under here, here's where you have to make sure that your supplier has complied, and they can say, yes, it falls under special provisions A195C or whatever, and so it's there. So this kind of leads you to what needs to be done on your packaging. So I hope this made the column seem a little bit clearer. The last one we have is an emergency response code guide for airlines. And, you know, this is very interesting. You're not going to be dealing with it. It's more for aircraft emergency response drills. But I thought it was interesting, just so you saw what it is. My first thing was, why is an ER code 2 liters? And that was the first thing I said. That's not what it is. So if you look at Exhibit 6A, I'm just kind of showing you one of them. The emergency response code for articles pressurized is 2L. So it comes down here, and the first is the drill number, and I only include the drill numbers that comply with your commodities that you have. Inherent hazard, it's a gas, non-flammable pressure, may create hazard in a fire, meaning you might have a little tiny explosion with these. Risk to the aircraft, minimal. A safety device, or a strut that maybe is in the middle of a flame or something on fire, yeah, it might explode, but it's not going to tear a hole into the side of the aircraft. Risk to occupants is indicated by the drill letters. Spill or leak, use 100% oxygen. It's telling them how to comply with this. Maintain minimum ventilation, firefighting measures, all agents according to availability, use fire standard. Basically saying something happens and something goes on that does ignite or whatever, use your normal, nothing special needs to be used. And then, but additional consideration, it can possibly abrupt loss of pressurization. So if it's near anything that could cause that, the pressure in the aircraft could change. So you should be aware of that. So just kind of interesting. I thought that all the little things that go on that they need, they've got all these drills, I'm sure, for anything that happens on these things. And then the drill letter is the second part. And if you go down to L, I like L, other risk, low or none, additional risk. So the L's are good. So, you know, you look at your batteries, those are 8L. So those are just telling you that it's falling in, and it kind of makes sense. Drill number 2 deals with class number 2. What do you deal with? An 8, and it tells you it's a corrosive. There could be possible corrosive damage. You know, risk to the occupants. You don't want these things happening out with where there's people that eyes, ears, nose, typical things with a corrosive material. And then it tells you what to do with it. So it all goes down into there. And of course, we've got our special 12Z, FZ. So here's where all your lithium ion batteries are. Here's where it goes into a little bit more detail. Sorry, I gave it because I looked at the last one. Additional considerations. Consider landing immediately if there is something with a lithium ion battery. So tells you how important lithium ion batteries are. It's got its own little division, basically, and the F is it's flammable, meaning we know lithium ion batteries can kind of self-combust and they become flammable. And then Z, aircraft cargo fire suppression system may not extinguish or contain the fire. Consider landing immediately. So, learn whether or not it has oxygen or not. You know, probably the first thing they do on a flammable liquid is if it's in a cargo section, they close off that cargo section, they stop any kind of airflow. Hopefully the fire will go out if it doesn't have any oxygen to spread. But this is basically saying you shut the oxygen off, the fire will still keep going. And that's what's so dangerous about lithium ion batteries, because they can't always get to that fire immediately either. So there's your table in great detail. I hope you feel a little bit more comfortable with that. That is the big thing of kind of getting to know this, because this is the go-to, like I said, and if you looked at the ones for the 49 CFR and the IMDG, it has a lot of what ifs on theirs. What if here? Well, this does it apply? Doesn't it apply? Do I need to look at this column? Don't I need to look at this column? What I really like about the IATA is every column is important, every column is usable, and every column gives you very specific instructions on where to go. So it's so funny. My air freight people who do air freight, they are like the best in the company, because they only use the book for what they need to use the book for. Whereas you will find in IATA, I do not find myself roaming around sections wondering where something is or trying to find something. I do that a lot in 49 CFR. I do it some in IMDG. I don't do it in IATA. You know, I'm looking up here, I know my codes on the beginning. I've got one simple table to look at whether or not something is an accepted quantity or exempted commodity. I know whether or not I can ship in limited quantity and the amount I can ship. I've got unpacking instructions that tell me exactly where to go. I've got to tell me what's the maximum I can make this package of putting it in for a passenger aircraft and then for a cargo aircraft. And if I've got special provisions that help me, these are more direct here, and they're written a lot for specific this specific thing. So as we saw, that's one of the things that kind of should perk up, that usually when you see something like articles, pressurized, your shock absorber struts or your safety devices, you think, oh, these aren't that bad, they're a class 9, they're really not going to hurt anything. And you see special provisions, and then you look at, it's like, you know, it says for UN 3164, my first thought is, oh my gosh, what extra do I need to do? More than likely it's what don't I need to do, which is really kind of nice. And then of course, this is just kind of like the properties and observations you have on IMDG. You know, what do they do there when something happens? So like I said, it's one of those, okay, this tells you there's not really a big risk here in L, because there's no other, you know, things, and it's a minimal risk. But it does tell you that, you know, the lithium ion batteries are a risk on planes. So that's one of the reasons why Daimler doesn't like to ship lithium ion batteries on aircraft. So that's where we are. Sorry, this one, I hope to get it out a little bit earlier, but I had a few things come up this weekend. But this is one, like I said, you might refer to back, but just getting to know this, of going back and forth from the presentation to this specific this specific one is going exhibit is going to be real helpful. So that ends this one. See you in Module 3.